Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and in this video I wanted to take advantage of what Invictus gave us, which was really a look at all three Hercules Starlifters side by side to kind of give us a nice backdrop for really comparing the differences between these. Now we know that in general you have three different models, being the C2, which is focused on cargo and doesn't have a whole lot of weaponry, the M2, which is a little bit more armored with the additional turret on the nose, which makes it a little bit more designed to deal with dropping either vehicles or cargo in hot zones. And finally, you've got the A2, which is bristling with turrets, but it's also more designed as a bomber. But even with those differences, I still get asked really frequently, which Hercules is the right one for me? And I covered this a while back, but I want to make sure that we get this, really in a nice breakdown to make sure people understand which is the right option. So with that in mind, let's get down into a little bit more detail. Now, if you haven't become a subscriber of the channel yet and you'd like to get more of my content, please consider hitting that subscribe button if you'd like to stay informed of the new content that comes out. So, diving in on the C2 versus M2, it's the most common debate by far. And when you look at it, they're very similar ships. So the questions are perfectly understandable, especially when you look and you see the price of the M2 is about $100 more than the C2, which means that you spend more, and yet you carry 696 SEU of cargo in the C2, and only 522 in the M2. So that's even a little bit more confusing when you look at the interior cargo holds of these ships and think, man, they look really to be the same size. And it's because they are. Now, this isn't the first ship that we've seen this dilemma in. Speaking of the Starfarer and the Starfarer Gemini model, which is the more militarized one, which is similar to the C2 versus the M2. And the Gemini carries less cargo, even though the interior spacing is the same. Now, the idea on both the Gemini and the M2 is that there's supposed to be armor on them. That means that they have thicker bulkheads because they're the military versions. So you have less room to carry goods. But that's not in-game, at least yet. So you do have this strange arbitrary limit on how much cargo you can carry in the exact same cargo space. I think you can maybe make a lore statement and say it has to do with the amount of cargo that with the armor added in and how much thruster power you have or something to that degree. But essentially what you have is the top layer of cargo from the C2 is not available in the M2. Now, beyond that, the starting components between the C2 and the M2 are worth addressing, but mostly just as a formality because you can and likely will upgrade these at some point. The C2 comes with industrial gear, the M2 comes with military gear, which is what I typically prefer to run. That being said, it's helpful to start with the better stuff in general because eventually components will either cost you more to insure or you will lose them if your ship is destroyed. From a weaponry perspective, both ships have pilot-controlled gimbaled revenants that face forward, which should help with dealing with a big target in front of you, but not going to do a lot in dealing with fighters that are, aren't flying directly at you, which real threats are not really going to do that. Now, beyond the pilot control, the C2 and the M2 both have a remote turret on the top, rear, and the bottom of the ship, with each of those bringing two size 4 M6A laser cannons. I don't love those cannons, and if I'm using this to protect myself, I may opt to use more revenants on this instead. The difference between the C2 and the M2 is that the crew goes up by 1 on the M2, and it comes with the additional turret seat in the cockpit, which controls the chin turret, which also has 2 more size 4 M6As on it. So when you break down the weaponry, the M2 definitely brings more firepower and the ability to control a forward-facing turret to protect the ramp on your cargo or your vehicle bay, which is valuable. But I think what it all really comes down to is what you want to do with it. If you bought a Hercules for pure cargo hauling like we see today, which is really just setting down on that outpost, you fill up, you fly away, maybe you have an escort with you, there's little to no reason to hamstring yourself in how much cargo you can carry for more weaponry that you can't even control without a full crew. Now, if you bought an M2 for vehicle transport or dropping in combat situations and cargo is kind of a secondary perk, then there is a lot of value in the money that you spent to upgrade it. Now, beyond the weaponry and the cargo differences, the M2 also brings along an auxiliary crew quarters that has 12 drop seats for crew to either man the vehicles that are in your cargo hold or to be infantry, but they also have an onboard armory to store weapons and armor. Now, that's not super relevant where things are today, but you can sit in any seat with a railgun on your back today. But in the future, seats are going to be limiting what you can carry, so perks like gun racks and armories are going to be very important at some point in the future. Both the C2 and the M2 can carry up to 2 tanks or a large variety of other vehicles to meet your needs, with no real differences between them with where things stand today. Now, I said I was going to be covering all of the Hercules variants, and you'll probably notice I didn't cover the A2 at all yet, and that's mostly for good reason. It's a wildly different animal. The price tag jumps several $100s. The cargo you can carry is supposed to be closer to 250 SCU, which is way lower, and the weaponry on board is vastly upscaled. The A2 looks to have a turret control room to manage all of the remote turrets on the ship, and it looks to have 4 turret control stations. The weaponry that it seems to bring kind of varies depending on what you look at. So I think it's a little TBD on what it brings, which, when you look at historical information from CIG and just kind of what it looks like in the game right now, things are just going to change until it's actually in the game, and then even beyond that, it may change again. So what it looks like right now is that 2 of the turrets that were on the front of the ship have actually moved, from the concept, have actually moved to the rear, which actually seems to give you a better layout for continuous and more coverage in your ground pounding, which is really what the ship is all about. It's designed to be able to fly over a battlefield and just do a continuous, barrage of damage. Now, many are going to look at these turrets and think it's an effective fighter screen, but the ship is very vulnerable from the dorsal side, which it means that it's really meant to be more of a combined arms effort to level the ground into nothing. Dealing with fighters and things like that, you probably need escorts, to kind of cover you from those blind spots. Speaking of turrets, the A2 seems to have the same chin turret that the M2 gets, but in addition, there's 2 more turrets with 2 guns on them, plus the turrets that they all get on the belly. And then there's 2 turrets that have what look to be a singular size 5 on each of them. Now, with the sizes of these weapons all being unknown, I'm pretty confident in saying that they should all be 4s or 5s. And with the 6 turrets on the underside of this ship, being below it is going to be a very bad place to be. And that's not even arguably the most scary part of the belly, which is that the A2 is actually a bomber capable of carrying and dropping 4 MOABs, mother of all bombs, which are size 10 gravity bombs that come from 2 bomb bays on the side. And then beyond that, you get the customization option to be able to go with, I think, 80 cluster bombs, which are really made to do carpet bombing. So overall, the A2 sacrifices much of its cargo and some of its vehicle transportation options. But for dealing damage to ground targets and potentially outposts, nothing really competes with it. Now, it is worth calling out that the A2 does seem to be one of the more niche combat ships that we have in the game. You think about a lot of the combat that we do right now, it's in space. Gravity bombs may not be real effective in space. I don't even know if you're going to be able to release one nose up and let it actually fly towards the target or not. We'll have to test that when it comes out. But it's going to be a little bit more limited than some of its other combat, alternatives that you may bring. So overall, that's kind of your Hercules comparison and breakdown. Now, as we get more information and can start playing with the A2 a bit more, you better believe I'm going to cover that because I think it's going to be pretty fun playing with these bombs. But until then, let me know if you have questions in the comments. Consider subscribing and becoming a Patreon supporter of the channel. Have yourselves a wonderful day and take care.